And we're back with another episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series, and you know what time it is today? It's collaboration time. We're focusing on a 2009 collab where people have revamped and reimagined a couple of the Glatorian Baramagna era Bionicle sets. They've reimagined them into their own really awesome reimagined mocks, and they've done a pretty good bang-up job. And this is going to be a two-parter episode here because there was a lot of it. But this is just wave one, you know, the reflection of the original wave of sets from that year. Not all of them, I don't think. I think there might be a couple of the larger sets missing. I don't remember. But regardless, it's still a pretty solid amount of mocks, and we're going to cover all of them today. So let's journey back to 2009, to the sandy lands of Baramagna, the Glatorian, the arenas, the fighting. Let's experience it all right here, right now, in the Bionicle Inspiration Series. Let's begin. So the first mock we've got today, it's by Student Scissors. And this is Skrall the Undefeated. So, of course, this is based off the Skrall set. This wasn't necessarily just one dude. It was kind of a whole race of dudes, armies of these guys. I always thought it was a really, really awesome set with some great weapons and just a really cool character design. But I'm going to do something a little different today. I want to read some quotes from Buddy Biosector from the old Bionicle wiki here. And we're going to just sort of get an idea of what these characters are. Some of these quotes I think are kind of funny. Some of them I think are a little more telling. And I think it'll be interesting to see how much these revamps reflect what the Wikipedia entries say. So I'm just going to read the very first paragraph that's there on Wikipedia. This one's a bit of a longer one. It says, "The Skrall were a species of warriors led by a leader-class Skrall, particularly Tuma," which we'll see in a second there. Particularly Tuma, which lived in the northern regions of Baramagna. They were a closely related species to the main Glatorian race. The Skralls fought in many arena battles, proving themselves to be dangerous and relentless enemies to the Glatorian. Well, there you go. There you go. And I think that's actually pretty well reflected here in this mock, to be honest. I love how Mr. Student Scissors here has reimagined this Skrall warrior into what appears to almost be a more sort of armor-clad warrior. I love that he's given him this sort of tunic, this kind of waistcoat design, very sort of gladiator-like to some degree, which is fitting because, you know, Glatorian gladiator, it's almost the same word. So I really love that he looks like someone who's really decked himself out so that he's ready for combat, he's ready to fight, and he kind of has his own unique aesthetic too. We take a look at the shoulders, he's used some of those almost like kaiju heads from some of the beasts from the Invasion from Below Hero Factory sets. He's used them there. They have this sort of more kind of sharp, rigid edges to them. We take a look at the lower legs there, kind of on the knees. There's these very sharp sort of knee spikes coming out of the bottom there. We even take a look at the feet. He's expanded upon that specific foot design. Those feet I know came on the Skralls when they were the star versions, the little smaller ones. And he's built underneath them, kind of giving them these sort of sharper edges at the front. It's cool. Overall, the general armor and aesthetic of this guy is a lot more sort of sharp, sinister, and almost sort of like a dark knight of sorts. Not like Batman, like an evil knight, you know, with big, sharp, spiky armor. I love that, you know. It seems like he'd be the kind of guy that walks into the arena and everyone would be like, "Who is this guy? This guy means business," you know. And like we read in the description there, they do mean business. They fought pretty hard in the arena and the Glatorian battles, all that sort of stuff. So I think this is a really good reflection of the character in that regard, and also is just a really nice aesthetic. And I think it really matches the sword and the and specifically the shield as well, with those big razor sharp edges on the edges of it. It's pretty cool. It's cool. It's just I think it's a brilliant take on the Skrall set there. He's done a pretty good bang up job, I think. So love your work there, Student Scissors. Let's move on to the next mock. This is by Muhammad Marie, and this is Tuma the Tyrannical. Well, we spoke about Tuma a second ago. Let me read the Wikipedia quote for Tuma. Tuma was a leader-class Skrall and the leader of the Rock Tribe and the Skrall. He was later defeated by Mutanui in single combat. He was the last of the leader-class Skrall, whose defeat caused the shattering of the Skrall Empire. There you go. That's pretty cool. I didn't realize that Tuma was like a separate class of Skrall, like a big version. What was it? Leader class Skrall, like it said there. So I find that interesting. I do enjoy my Bionicle lore, so we learned something new today. Anyway, given that idea that they are a leader class Skrall, I like the fact that there are some sort of subtleties to Tuma and some expansions as well that kind of match the original Skrall revamp that we saw there, and the original Skrall set for that regard too. I love that he has this very similar tunic design. It's a little bit more sort of padded out and armored up even further, which makes sense. He's the leader. He might have more, you know, prettier looking armor, or more sort of like hardened armor, perhaps, just because he is a bit of a larger dude and he's the leader. I'm sure he gets all the good stuff, you know. And I also like the fact that, you know, the original Skrall had those two large sort of spike things coming out the sides of his shoulders. I never realized it, but the original set was kind of playing off of that. And instead of him having two, he has four, and they're more on the back, kind of jutting out as sort of back spikes of sorts. So I also like that Mohammed's kind of focused them a little bit closer to the tops of the shoulders there, and it kind of seems to mimic that a little bit more. I like that, especially that he's put a little bit of lime on it as well to kind of attempt to mirror the original pieces that we saw in the Skralls there, which you can also see on Tuma. They're sort of towards the bottom there in that kind of V shape that those form. They're angled downwards like that. That's pretty cool. But yeah, I also love the little subtle bits of lime. I like that this is a more primarily black armored version of Tuma, kind of, again, similar to that original Skrall there, seeming like this sort of dark armored warrior that's sinister and evil and a bad guy, you know. It's pretty cool. But I also love that too. What I spoke about before, how this guy has a similar tunic to the Skrall, and little sort of subtleties to it. The fact that this is a collab, a whole bunch of people have come together and decided, hey, you know what? We're all going to build under a unified theme. I love seeing it when two different builders sort of collaborate with themselves in that regard and go, hey, your mock is actually quite similar, like story or location-wise, to mine. What sort of techniques are you doing that I could put in mind? So there's a bit of consistency between the two. I think if you're planning on doing a collab, that's a great thing to do. And it's also just a good sort of like spirit of community thing, you know, just the idea of like reaching out to other people and just, you know, wanted to have a chat and have a bit of fun while you're doing it, you know. It's a fun thing to do and a great idea, and definitely would make this collab a much more exciting and fun and rewarding thing as well. So really, really cool. Love your work there, Mohammed, good sir. And, I mean, great to see the Skrall and Tuma be so closely related. Let's move on to the next mock. This is by Ron Folkers, and this is Metis Snake. So, if you watched the old Legend Reborn movie, which I think was a really fun and good movie, Metis, of course, originally was an Agori, a little Matoran-esque dude. Magoran and Atori are technically different things. I just said Atori. Agori, Matoran. Two separate things, but still... he did change into a snake later on into the movie as punishment for the evil doings that he did. But it's kind of rare to see a Metis snake as a mock. It's not something you see every day. We never actually got a set of it, even though that was, you could argue, a pretty big part of his character. And so it's great to see that being made here. And he did a really good job, I think. But before we continue, let's read the quote for Metis. So, what it says over on Biosector, it says, Metis was an Agori of the Ice Tribe in Barra Magna. He later joined the Rock Tribe after betraying all of Barra Magna. All of Barra Magna, guys. What a bad dude. There's also a quote on Biosector here from old Metis, and his quote is, "That's not a joke." So, there you go. What a perfect quote to sum up Metis. Not at all. Anyway, so, let's talk about this mock here. I think Ron's done an awesome job. When we actually look at the source material here, again, like we said, this was more sort of built in that animation style here. You know, wasn't something you could directly translate into a mock. But Ron's done a pretty good job. When we look at this original source material, there kind of is the same texture as the back of Metis's masks all along its body. So I love the fact that he has just made the scales on this snake a bunch more Metis masks. And the fact that he has expanded the original Metis mask on the head there, one, to look like the source material, but two, just so it differentiates itself a little bit more from the rest of the body. I think that's really cool. I also love the tail on this guy, which is a modified cut element that is taking Strakk's. Oh no, it's not Strakk, it's actually Metis's shield. But he's cut off one of the little sort of snowflakes on the shield and sort of attached it on there, which is actually quite accurate to that original source material there. And, you know, hey, yeah, sure, people could get upset about cutting pieces, but if that's a choice you want to make, good on you, you do what you want. But I actually really like that piece. I kind of wish that was an official piece, just this, sort of icicle-like little shiv or a dagger of sorts, and just the fact that it does attach onto it like that based off, the way that he's cut that piece. It's kind of a cool looking piece, you know. If you're going to modify pieces, it's a good piece to modify, so it works well. So I love how he's done the individual segments on this snake here, using a bunch of those Metru prefab limb elements, the upper arms on the Metru sets there, and just attaching a bunch of ball joints in between with that little small segment linking all of those arms there. I think it looks absolutely awesome. And on top of that too, it's just a great and effective way to build a snake, you know, just get a bunch of those ball joints, get a bunch of limb elements like that, and just link it together, armor them up, and you're done. pretty straightforward, but you get a good result like we see here. So love your work there, Ron. You've done a bang-up job. Let's move on to the next mock. The next mock is Zesk, and it's by my man, the Man. Man? Yeah, this guy's cool. I adore your name. It's fun to say. Anyway, the Man has done a great job on Zesk. Let's read the quote for Zesk from good old Biosector. It says, the Zesk were a primitive subspecies of Agori. And that's kind of all it said. It did go into other stuff, but it started to go into history. That was all it said for its backstory. Or not really backstory, more for just a general sum up, as it were. So, not much on the Agori, but I like their quote. The quote says, I Zesk, no talk, leave me. Doesn't really, not a very chatty guy, not someone who likes to share or collaborate, as it were. But hey, we can build someone who doesn't like to collaborate in this Collaborate, because these people like to collaborate. Anyway, Zesk. I love what the Man has done here in making him a lot more Scorpion-like. When you look at Zesk and when you look at Vorox, two very similar characters there, they both had those sort of larger, like, stinger tail things. They kind of looked like scorpions, didn't they? And I'm sure to some degree they have a bit of inspiration taken from scorpions, because Barra Magna was a big old sandy world, and scorpions are something you'd probably find in that sort of world, So I really love the idea of giving him a more scorpion-like aesthetic here. I think it's absolutely genius. I think it's very fitting, very awesome, and it also kind of fits the general sort of idea of Vorox and Zesk. They were these sort of more like savage, kind of almost sort of like nomads, almost like a different kind of sort of separated tribe. I always had the headcanon that those guys were originally very similar to all the other different tribes, like the Water Tribe and the Fire Tribe in Barra Magna, but I know they kind of isolated themselves in the desert and kind of being away from the rest of civilization and maybe having very limited resources. Kind of just, made them be think differently, have a very different culture, and perhaps go a little cuckoo, perhaps, because, sometimes the sandy deserts might do that to you. So, I don't know, I like that there is a sort of slight animalistic element to it that could kind of tie in with maybe a little bit of craziness or just a very different culture for them, I think that's cool, But specifically talk about what he's done on this mock. I think it's a great choice to use some of those CCBS Hero Factory style pieces here. One, because I think you get more tan pieces, like specifically like the General Grievous set and a few other different things here and there. There's a good amount of tan to be playing with. So if tan is a more limited color in your part selection, turning to some CCBS construction sets there would definitely be up your alley and be helpful for a revamp similar to this. But also, I think the Zesk mask actually kind of fits with the textures of a lot of CCBS pieces, so it just sort of blends in very nicely, which makes a lot of sense. So definitely a great choice to be using that there. And certainly something to consider yourself. If you really want to specifically include a mask in a Bionicle mock that you're working on, what texture does it have? What kind of pieces would perfectly match that, Maybe it's not even a mask. Maybe just there's a specific piece that you want to build with. Focus on the textures, see some other pieces that have similar textures, match them together, and you're going to get a really cohesive, unified, aesthetically pleasing looking mock. And this is a nice example of that. One thing I love about the mask, though, that Zesk mask, is how he's done the eyes. He's taken two Lego berry pieces, which naturally those berry pieces have the two little stems with berries on both ends of the stems there, and he's just sort of slotted them into the mask very perfectly, There's no specific connection, I imagine, there. It's just sort of slotted in. But gosh, it really works for, the eyes on this Zesk here. I think he's done a pretty bang-up job, in all honesty. So, yeah, love how that looks. Really solid way to build a more sort of slightly customized version of that head and really give it more pronounced, sinister-looking eyes. He's done a good job. I adore it. All right, love your work. Let's move on to the next one here. This is a Vorox, and it's by Nathan Hake. So the Vorox, again, fairly similar to the Zesk that we were speaking about before. Let me read the old Biosector information on the Vorox to give you a little bit of context. The Vorox are the warrior class members of the Sand Tribe. They are of the same species as the Glatorian on Barra Magna and on Bota Magna. They were made up of what was once the Sand Tribe, though after the Core War, the Barra Magna Vorox became primitive nomads with a bestial nature. So again, I think that leads a bit more context to why I really liked that Zesk mock, the fact that that's kind of their history, and so I think it's a good way of interpreting that. But additionally, I love how this mock is presented, and I love how that actually reflects the backstory we just read there. The fact that he's standing on this awesome looking base with this really well designed rock work, this beautiful grass, and slight bits of sand thrown in there too, and the fact that it's a nice circular base like that, just looks lovely. And I love seeing the Vorox sort of crawling over the terrain like that. It really paints a beautiful picture, and you can just see him stalking some prey or something, or just kind of living out in the wilds and having a good time, you know? I think that's absolutely awesome. And there's a lot to like about this mock, but just straight up, I think the inclusion of the stand here really, really works well and really makes this mock pop. I especially love the fact that he's chosen to give it less of just like a basic sort of like sandy stand underneath, and has included the rocks and the grass, because it kind of nicely contrasts the mock as well. It really helps it to sort of stand out more and pop, you know? If you had just put tan plates or slopes or whatever underneath it, it might kind of detract from the mock a bit because it's the same color on the same color, you know? So I like that nice little subtle contrast there. It works well. But let's specifically talk about the mock now, because there's also a lot of really cool stuff going on there too. I love this custom head design. Very similar to the original mask, but very different too. He's taken a lot of system pieces there and built his own custom version, which kind of perfectly matches how the original one looked. And the beauty of doing that is you can always add your own little personal touches to it. You can make it slightly bigger or slightly smaller, depending on the scale you want to play with. But also it can just be really fun to translate one piece into your own kind of version using multiple different pieces like that. It honestly, I think is just really fun, really cool, and just looks nice. So I love seeing that. I love seeing masks being reimagined with system pieces. He's done an awesome, awesome job here. And those eyes really pop even more, seeing those Nexonite pieces being used there. That's absolutely awesome. I love too, specifically on the arms, but it's kind of on the legs as well, this more sort of like shambled, kind of thrown together armor, this more sort of ragtag look to him. The fact that you can kind of see like exposed wires and different kind of greebles and things, and there is this sort of almost like bone-like armor over the top. I love how that looks. You know, it's kind of similar to the headcanon I just said before of the Vorox, you know, originally being a more, well, a lot less animalistic, which was, you know, what was the term that they used there on Biosector, and instead being more sort of like, for a lack of a better term, civilized, you know. I don't like using all these terms, and I don't want it to be degrading to the Vorox. They're people too, you know. But I like the fact that it does give it this sense that, like, while they've been out in the sand, I mean, they are the sand tribe, you know, their armor probably got a bit of damage from lots of sandstorms and moving around in the sand and hitting rocks and all that sort of stuff, you know, so their armor does look a little bit more damaged or exposed, or they've had to replace it with bones from beasts and different things, you know. I think it's a very fitting aesthetic for the specific story that Biosector has given the Vorox, you know. I think that's very nice, and a very distinct and very different approach for the Vorox as well, but one that I think is very fitting to the backstory. So, absolutely adore this take on the Vorox. Love your work. Let's move on to a kind of Vorox adjacent mock. It's Malum by Lego David. So, what Lego David's done here, which I think is a brilliant addition, is simply included a Vorox a mask there on Malum's shoulder. And we can see now, a little bit more up close, just how similar that Vorox mask was to the system-built version. Love your work. Anyway, I love the inclusion of that piece because, let's read the backstory for Malum and then you'll understand. Malum is an extremely powerful but hot-tempered Glatorian. Originally serving as the Fire Tribe's secondary Glatorian, he was later exiled to the Wastelands as punishment for committing crimes in the arena. Bad boy Malum, he's a trickster, he is. But hey, that's a little bit of an extra thing about Malum's backstory. Once he was exiled, he went and joined with the Vorox, and he kind of became their like pseudo-leader to some degree. And I always loved that. I always thought that was a really cool story for this character. I remember playing that out a lot as a kid, actually. It was really fun. But what I love is that this revamp specifically is finding a way to relate him a little bit more to the Vorox, you know? Has he given himself some more like bone-like armor, or, you know, is he just wearing the head of the old chieftain of the Vorox or something, which, you know, is kind of what this revamp's doing here. So I like that there is a little bit more of a callback to the Vorox to some degree, because he looks so different to them, and it makes sense that he might, adapt himself even further into their culture and do what he can, you know. So I think that's pretty cool. I think it's a really fun and certainly unique addition that you don't really see every day. You know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see a revamp of Malum, but he has like a lot more tan on him. Like he's kind of just put all this bone armor over the top of his original existing armor. And that'd be really cool, actually. Anyway, besides the point, there's an idea for you. Anyone is free to use that if they so please, but let me know if you build it, because I think that'd be really cool. But anyway, let's talk about Lego David's Malum here. So, love the inclusion of that Vorox mask, like I said. But I also like that this specific Malum is very similar to the original version of Malum. There's not a huge amount that's changed. There's a few little subtle things, like some system pieces on the torso and on the legs there as well, in a few different places. It's mainly just sort of slight, subtle aesthetic changes. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to participate in a collab but you don't have a lot of time, why not just, throw together a sort of very subtle revamp on a Bionicle? You don't have to do a lot for it still to be a good, shining example of a mock. And hey, you get a bit of fun and you get to participate in a collab. That's also really cool, isn't it? So, nothing wrong with just doing some little subtle tweaks to a set, because hey, there are some Bionicle sets out there that are pretty much already perfect as they are and don't really need a revamp. But maybe there's a subtle, one or two things there that you want to change yourself. Definitely worth considering doing, and also can just be a fun way to spend the afternoon. Just take one of your favorite sets and just put some little subtle aesthetic changes to it, because why not? You're putting your own personal touch on there. That's always fun. I also love specifically as well with this revamp how Lego David has reimagined the gauntlets on Malum here. Those two big flame claws that he's got. The fact that he's kind of padded them out at the back with some of those foot element pieces, just really making them look a lot more like gauntlets, like a specific weapon that he uses rather than the fact that he just has flame gauntlets, which I don't actually know if he just had flame gauntlets or if those were his hands. Not really sure, but either way, they look really cool. And I love how they look here with this very subtle change. But it's a subtle change, but it goes a long way, which is always really cool. So, love your work, David. Let's move on to the next mock. This is Tarix, and it's by Awesomeness Born. Now, Tarix was a Glatorian I never actually got. I ended up getting him later in a bulk lot, but I never physically bought him as a set. But remember when I did build him from that bulk lot, I was like, man, Tarix is an awesome-looking character. I think this revamp has really done my boy justice. But hey, before we look at the revamp, let's read Tarix's backstory. And it says, Tarix was the prime Glatorian of the Water Tribe. Thanks, Biosector. But it has a quote for Tarix. It says, the secret to being a winner is already knowing the mistakes the loser will make and not making them yourself. Fair enough, Tarix. Fair enough. Anyway, let's talk about Tarix. So, he was a pretty noble-looking fighter, and I love this take on Tarix here, that he has big old regal gold armor. I mean, the original one did as well, but this one is certainly a lot more prominent and large and in charge. It's really nice. He's making a statement, And I think it's a really cool idea, The fact that the bulk of these Glatorians are gladiators fighting for their tribe, for honor and glory, It kind of makes sense that you'd want to come out and be like, hey, I'm 5 years in a row the champion of the Glatorian arena. I don't think that's canon, but, I've won a few tournaments myself, and you know what I've done with the riches and glory and the fame? I have amazing, cool gold ornate armor that is really big and really cool, and I'm going to show it off, I like that idea. It gives him a lot more personality, I think the original set had personality, but he's certainly developing the character, I think, in a really good, positive direction, and I like that. I like that a lot. So, really cool idea to give him the big old Brutaka armor like that, because it does look really regal and in charge and prominent. It's awesome. And I love the way that the Anika Jala gold armor pieces there that are sort of making the top bit of his chest. I love how those two kind of flow into that Stars gold armor there. They just kind of very nicely sort of fill in some gaps and just sort of unify into what kind of looks like one armor piece there. I think it's really, really cool, and just a nice looking design and just a good bit of shaping as it all sort of flows into one there. I think that's really cool. Another thing I think is really cool is the inclusion of all the chains on this guy. I love the fact that there are the specific chains on the weapons. Makes sense. You could maybe use it as a sort of offensive weapon, or if he loses his what are they, like axes, or I don't know what you'd call it. I'd say axes. Yeah, we're going to go with axes. If one sort of flies out of his hand in battle, he can pull the chain back and retrieve it. It's all wrapped around his arm like that, so it'd be a lot harder to lose it. But also, I like that the chains kind of look like sort of like very similar to like a boxer, like sort of wrist wraps. That's the word I'm thinking of. That they kind of wrap all that kind of cloth around their armor just to kind of protect it a little bit more, or, to help with the punching and whatever it is. I'm not a boxing expert. I don't know what they do, but they look aesthetically really cool. So I love the idea that the chains are a part of his aesthetic, giving him this sort of fighter look. And it just looks nice, I think it's a really welcome addition. And it's certainly giving me ideas about how this guy would actually physically fight in the arena, which certainly I think it's something to think about if you want to work that into your mock. If they are a very fighting heavy character, have a think about how they fight, what they fight with, what they do in a fight, and see if you can actually put that into the mock itself. Because if you can, you're going to get a really solid mock. Because I always think that when you can really see who the character is, there's a really strong sense of characterization in what you build. That's where mocks really, really shine. That's where they go from being a good mock to a great mock. So certainly something to think about if you if that's something you want to think about, you know. Don't have to, you know. You can still build a pretty cool mock and not really see how they fight, you know. But something to consider. Anyway, love your work, sir. Let's move on to the next mock. It's by My Snail Eats Pizza, and this is Strakk the Honorless. So let's read some of Strakk's backstory, because I think he has a really cool one. Strakk is a prime Glatorian formerly employed to the Ice Tribe. A fierce warrior, Strakk fought in the arena battles until joining forces with Mutanui in his quest to reform Spirus Magna and defeat Pterodax. Okay, well, I'm gonna be honest with you, I just copied and pasted that. I didn't read that before I recorded. That's, like, I didn't know that. I didn't actually know that Strakk was like, no, I will be honorable and I will fight with Mutanui, you know? I didn't think that was something he did. But I always remember in The Legend Reborn where he kind of did some slimy, sort of not-so-good tactics against the car, and it was like, you know what? I'm going to just fight the way that I want to fight. I'm a relentless fighter, you know? I always liked that. I always liked the fact that he was this sort of, you know, not-so-by-the-books kind of guy, you know? Someone who was sort of verging on being expelled from the arena fights, you know? That's what I personally really liked. And I think that this mock actually really reflects that. But yeah, I can also see some elements of him being a more sort of honorable warrior that sort of changed his ways and decided to help out his boy Mutanui. But anyway, let's talk about this Strakk revamp, because this might be my favorite in this collab. I adore it. So, I love the fact that Strakk very typically, I never really noticed it until now, but he kind of does have a bit of a skeleton aesthetic. I always saw it as very sort of just ice-focused, like his teeth and the general sort of shape of his mouth seem very sort of ice-like in nature, like that of an ice golem or something. But they are sort of, it does look a bit like a skull. So I love that he's played with that skull aesthetic, and any bits where there's white, it looks very skeletal, whether that's him having a rib cage or very, very thin arms. It looks awesome. It looks really, really cool. I really dig that aesthetic for Strakk. And something else that I really dig with this aesthetic for Strakk is the fact that he kind of resembles that of like a wrestler, like a heel in wrestling, you know, the bad guys in wrestling who have this, you know, depending on the wrestlers. I'm not a big wrestling fan, but this is the little bits that I know about wrestling. You know, some of them really go over the top with their aesthetic and their look, whether it's, you know, I've got a big old skull mask, or I've got, you know, big old spiky shoulders like I'm from Kiss or something, you know. I love the idea that in these arena fights, there could be elements of wrestling to them where it's like, you know what? I'm going to come out and I'm going to be the bad guy. Even though I'm not actually a bad guy in the real world, I'm going to play a bad guy character, and people are going to love to hate me as I, you know, fight someone in the arena. And so I like the fact that Strakk is like, how can I play with that aesthetic? Well, I'm going to make myself look more skeletal and awesome, and that's really going to help my brand. I'm going to really rake in the money in these arena fights, you know? I don't know, I think it's really cool, you know, combining elements of wrestling with the fighting-focused Glatorian era of Bionicle. I think that's really, really cool. Really cool. I don't know if that is the specific inspiration for this, but that's at least what I'm seeing, and I adore it. I love it. Some other stuff I love on this mock is the inclusion of some of the tan stuff. Whether it's the little, like, necklace that he's got, or these sort of tan robes kind of flowing out of his pants. I don't know, there's something that seems very, like, ceremonial about that, or I don't know, to me, I'm like, is that some sort of, like, Ice Tribe culture or something? I don't know, I love it. I don't know what it specifically is, but one, the color really pops against the white and the dark blue and the gunmetal and all that. But it also just aesthetically looks really cool. I love that slight intrigue behind it, because you're like, what is that? It looks cool. And it gets you thinking. I always think that's cool, you know? You don't always need to explain all the answers to stuff. Sometimes it's nice to just let your mind wander, and it makes what you're wondering about even cooler, you know? It's really awesome. The final thing I'll talk about on this mock is, well, I lied. I'll talk about something else, because I really like this one. His Thornax launcher. The fact that he's made it look more like a pistol, that's awesome. I love that idea. I also love the idea, too, that it's just like, oh my god, Strakk has a gun. Like, everyone's fighting with their weapons and shields, and Strack's like, I'm gonna just shoot the guy. And it's like, whoa, that's against the rules, Strakk, you know? I don't know. I think that's funny. That maybe isn't against the rules, you know? We saw in the movie as well, people actually shooting those Thornax launchers at each other. It's probably not against the rules, but I think that's a funny image, isn't it? Anyway, I also love those ice shoulders. Always did on the set. Still love them here. Really great to see them a little bit closer to the head, giving him this sort of big kind of imposing look. I don't know, it just looks really aesthetically pleasing, I think. And I don't know, Strakk was always one of my favorite Bionicle characters. Really like Strakk and really love this revamp, so fantastic work. On to the next one, guys. This is Gresh, and it's by My Snail Eats Pizza as well. So, what do I love about this? I love the localization of all the lime on this guy. The fact that just the sort of top of his torso and his head is lime. It could be that maybe he didn't have the original Gresh and he wanted to play with the Stars Gresh. They did have different colored helmets. But I just love that idea. Also, I think it's just nice to include that little pop of lime. Just makes the mock pop a little bit more, you know? Nothing wrong with including a little extra color on a mock like this if you kind of group it all in one area. I think it looks really cool. I also love how he slightly changed the weapons on Gresh here. The fact that he's not using the Gresh weapons and instead is using the Vaki weapons. It could be because, hey, maybe he didn't have them and maybe he just had that Gresh mask in his collection, you know, bought it off Bricklink or something. Really cool to use those pieces. One, just to be different, but two, also, you know, hey, maybe you really want to build Gresh, but you don't have those weapons. You're like, man, I need those weapons before I can build Gresh. Well, there's always another option, always something to consider, so definitely worth playing around with your parts if you are looking to revamp something. You're like, I really need this piece though. Do you need that piece? Is there an alternative? I think this is a beautiful alternative for the weapons. It looks great. I also love too the system additions on this guy, specifically on the upper legs and the knee. The fact that the knee really kind of pops out like that, giving him this more sort of dynamic flowing look. He's sort of this very quick, nimble warrior perhaps. And the way that just the leg armor looks there using some of those interesting slope pieces in dark green. It just forms a really aesthetically pleasing looking design there. I think it's awesome, you know. I always love seeing more prominent knee designs like that too, and great to see it being accomplished with some system pieces there. I think it really kind of helps with the characterization of this mock here, but also just looks nice. So really well done. On to the second last mock now. This is also by Student Scissors, and this is Atakus the Treacherous. I didn't read the quote for Gresh. I'm so sorry. I really was enjoying reading the quotes. Gresh's quote is, Gresh was the young and noble second Glatorian of the Jungle Tribe. Thanks, Gresh. Now, Atakus the Treacherous. Let us read his quote. This is a long one, but I think a really good one. Atakus was cruel, brutal, and more than willing to fight intruders of Roxtus. And he also was rude and irreverent, and enjoyed mocking and bullying Agori from other tribes. Throughout Barra Magna, it was said that if you don't hate Atakus, you must never have met him. Wow, that's really harsh. I mean, he seems like a harsh guy, but, you know, essentially this this little Wikipedia article here is just like, hey, screw this guy. So there you go. Anyway, I think some of that is reflected in how this mock is built. I love how he has this, like, Darth Malgus, Darth Malak, almost Darth Vader-like breathing apparatus around his mask. The fact that, hey, you know, maybe he lives in more sort of sandstorm-focused areas and he needs to sort of, you know, shield his mouth from getting too much sand into it. So he sort of reworked his armor to give him some additional help with breathing or something. I don't know. I just think it's a really cool aesthetic change. And there's something kind of Mad Max about it almost too, which I think is surprisingly fitting for Barra Magna. It's very similar settings, you know. But also there's something that looks almost sort of like Bandit-like with this design specifically. And I think it's very fitting for the way he was described as this fighter who pretty much will just fight and bully anyone. And I certainly think that look, combined with the chains and the more tattered cape, certainly seems to reflect that. He doesn't look like a friendly guy. He looks like a bad guy, someone you don't want to mess with, you know? So some really positive and really beautiful changes to him that really fit the story behind this character. One final thing I want to talk about, then we'll move on, is the knee design on this guy here, using two of those Huna masks in black and flipping them upside down, giving him a more sort of prominent sort of spiky armored knee design there. I think it looks awesome. I think it was really, really cool and really works. Really, that Huna mask and that Hero Factory sort of armor plate there, the two of them flow very nicely into one another. That's just a really solid looking design. So love your work. Always great to see characters that really reflect the backstory that we saw, but also just have a very distinct and unique take compared to the original set. All right, last mock now. This is a big and a good one. It's by Radar, and this is Fero and Skirmix. So we'll quickly read what they say on Biosector about these guys here. Fero was a bone hunter who rode a rock steed called Skirmix across the sands of Barra Magna, looking for Glatorian to capture and bring back to the arena of Roxtus. So that's pretty cool. And I actually really love how Radar here has reworked Skirmix, the rock steed, as it were. Because I kind of get the picture that, you know, there's a whole bunch of rock steed roaming around where this guy lives, and maybe it's just a part of their culture or just a part of what they like to do to tame these beasts and to ride them and use them and become, you know, good friends with them, you know? And I love how agile Skirmix looks here. The inclusion to just kind of thin out some of his limbs and really focus on some of the parts spamming around the neck and the torso there. I don't know, something that looks a lot more lizard-like with it. I can really see these things like maybe really picking up some speed and being very sort of like fierce, nimble creatures. I don't know, and I didn't quite get that with the original set, but seeing this revamp here that's really focusing on being more sort of lizard-like and having a more sort of organic look to it, it kind of really starts to paint a different picture, and I really like that mental image personally. So I love how he's really changed it up there and really focused on the technique of part spamming specifically, you know? The choice to use those longer claw pieces, the choice to use those shoulder pad pieces from like Hulkbusters and in dark red there. It looks really, really nice, and it's always a good idea to do that. Spam your pieces like that, because it can always just look at that. It looks gorgeous, doesn't it, you know? And you get a beautiful result here with this rock steed. It looks awesome. I love, too, the eye on this rock steed here on Skirmix. The little pop of yellow there on that very small-looking claw piece really is silhouetted nicely by the general shape of that head and just looks awesome. So really, really good choice there with the eye design. And I love how it kind of has that slight bit of black around it, like that's almost sort of a yellow pupil to some degree. I don't know, I think that looks absolutely phenomenal. It's really cool. Focusing on, was it Fero? Fero. Not Furno from Hero Factory, but Fero. It's a more sort of simplistic build, mainly just using kind of prefab pieces there. There's honestly nothing wrong with that, because he looks badass when you compare him with his rock steed, and he's riding on the back there. And, you know, sometimes you don't want to put too much detail or too much work or custom designs into a mock if you want it to be riding on top of something, because you don't want it to have all these sort of, you know, big, kind of cumbersome armor pieces that kind of limit his ability to actually sit on the thing. Going for a little bit more of a simplistic design, I think, is really smart and works really well here, so that you can very effectively have him riding on top. It just makes sense, you know? So never feel guilty if you're building a more sort of laid-back, prefab, focused, sort of simplistic mock like that, because I think, personally, it looks awesome, and it looks even better coupled with Skirmix here. So a really, really solid duo, both of them really well designed and looking pretty. Love your work. And love your work to all the builders in this collab. We'll do the second part of this collab very, very soon. I hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for more. Be sure to look at the links in the description if you want to see even more from these guys. They've built some fantastic stuff, and it's definitely worth checking out what they've done. And hey, maybe even leaving a like or a comment on their stuff. Let them know what you think. Additionally, in the description is a link to the submission email. If you've got a collab that you and your friends have done, or you're planning to do, or maybe you've just got a mock of your own that you want to see on the show, send me an email to the email you're currently seeing on your screen or in the description below, and I will consider to make an episode all about it. Additionally, there's links to my social media in the description below, so if you want to check out some of the stuff that I've got going on, that's the place to do so. That includes my Patreon as well, so if you want some bonus content, definitely consider subscribing. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Love you tons. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.